Welcome into Duval Daily, presented by GinJag.com. I'm Jordan Lugo. Thanks so much for tuning in here. Thursday, January 25th. Trent Baalke's press conference is in the books. I guess you can say postseason, post-defensive coordinator hire, whatever you want to call it, press conference. But Trent Baalke, he met with the media at 11:30. That press conference has concluded. The big news here. He says he is far from retirement. Obviously, he joked around a little bit saying he thinks about retirement every day. But he said he's far from retirement. He's 59 years old. He does not think about retiring anytime soon. So for all those, including myself, that were hoping that maybe the rumors were true, the scuttlebutt was true, that Trent Baalke had been considering retirement, that he might be retiring, not going to happen. Diving into everything that Trent Baalke said. We're going to get into all of it here. Baalke said that he and Doug Peterson are in lockstep now, maybe more than ever. Says every coaching decision when it comes to the staff is on Doug Peterson. Says Peterson owns that part of it, right? Says he supports everything that Doug Peterson does from a coaching staff standpoint, but then goes on to say that he supports it because he's involved in it. Kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth, in my opinion. Says that all of the narratives out there that there is infighting and a power struggle inside the building are false narratives. Not surprising that he would say that. One thing I noticed that kind of just bothers me is he says pretty good way too damn much, right? He said, well, we thought we had a pretty good roster. We thought we had a pretty competitive roster. We still think we have a pretty competitive roster. Is pretty good the goal here? Because, yeah, I mean, they are pretty good. They've won more games than they lost both of the last two seasons. Obviously, an epic slide at the end of the 2023 season. But is pretty good the goal? I thought the Super Bowl was the goal, quite frankly. I don't like hearing pretty good that much. And maybe that's just semantics. Maybe that's just the way he talks. But that's not inspiring, in my opinion. Baalke was asked about not addressing edge last offseason. Says, we brought back Smoot. He was coming back from injury. Felt good about that. We had Chase on in the final year of his deal. We drafted Abdullah. We know that, Trent. Everyone knows that. The question is about not addressing it further. Why didn't you address it further? And he basically said, well, I'm not going to live in the past. Not going to talk about what ifs. It's like, all right. Because you dropped the ball. You absolutely dropped the ball. Everyone told you the entire offseason to go get more edge depth. You didn't do it. Obviously, we all liked DeJuan Smoot. He was playing fantastic before his Achilles injury. But you're going to rely on a defensive end coming off an Achilles, coming back quickly from an Achilles injury. You're going to rely on K'Lavon Chaisson, who's never done anything positive consistently throughout his career. Yasir Abdullah, who you drafted on day 3, like, that's your response? Completely a ridiculous response by Trent Baalke. And Rick Ballou even asked, Baalke said, well, I'd like to know which players you're talking about that we could have brought in. Ballou says, Jadeveon Clowney. Baalke says, well, we had him in the building. It's like, yes, we all know you had him in the building. Why did you let him leave the building? Wouldn't get into him if they offered anything or whatnot. Says he decided to make a different decision. Well, yeah, if you didn't make an offer, but we don't know. He did say we've got to get bigger, stronger, and more physical in the trenches. He reiterated that twice. He did somewhat waffle on that a little bit, but I think the fact that he said that twice is a good sign. I think that he knows they have got to get better on the interior of the offensive line and the interior of the defensive line. I think he knows that. I think the coaching staff knows that. And I think that they will work to improve that. Still not the most inspiring thing. Josh Allen will be a Jaguar, quote unquote, according to Trent Baalke. Goes on to say they have not started negotiating yet. It's like, okay. Sounds like a franchise tag coming in for Josh Allen, in my opinion. I mean, you haven't started negotiating? What are we doing? It's been almost a month since the season ended. What are we doing? Get the deal done. Make him a franchise cornerstone. He was very complimentary of Calvin Ridley, says he loves Calvin Ridley, says Ridley's all ball. We'll see how that situation plays out again. If the Jaguars sign Calvin Ridley to a new contract prior to the draft, that will cost them a second-round pick. Anything else looks like it will be a third-round pick. Baalke was asked if the Jaguars will be more aggressive this year in free agency. He said last year they just didn't have the cap space to do so. They were aggressive the first 2 seasons he was here. Says the team will look different in April. Says every team will look different in April. So it's like, okay, what does that mean? Nothing. He says how much different, that depends on the discussions we will have over the next couple of weeks. So again, non-answer. He says that they could do a Trevor Lawrence extension this offseason. Like nothing about his play this past year made them feel like they wouldn't be comfortable doing that. Says that's not off the table at all. Says Trevor Lawrence is the long-term guy. Gives his seal of approval for Luke Fortner. Says offensive line was more of a systemic issue. Of course he did. He drafted Luke Fortner. And that was kind of where I was saying he was waffling about getting bigger, more physical, stronger in the trenches. He said that twice, but then he went on to kind of blame the offensive line systemic issues instead of a individual blaming of Luke Fortner, which I think it's clear that Luke Fortner was the weak link of the interior of the offensive line. Reiterates that they have a lot of good players. I agree. They do have a lot of good players. Says they were not a 2-win team. They were 9-8, which he says not good enough, but says they don't need a complete rebuild. I agree they don't need to completely rebuild the entire roster, but they need to have multiple new starters on the interior of the offensive line. They need to have at least one new starting caliber player on the interior of the defensive line. I think that they've got to figure out what they're doing at wide receiver, obviously, if it's Calvin Ridley, if it's something else. Because you rolling into the season next year, if it's just Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram, to me, that's not enough. He said he talked about not reading all the stuff about the defensive scheme, everybody kind of freaking out about the man-heavy defense. And then he proceeded to talk about all the stuff he's been reading about Ryan Nielsen's man-heavy defense, saying that he's not a man-only coach. Yeah, it's not about being man-only, Trent. No one is man-only. That defense doesn't exist. It's about running a ton of press, more press coverage than anyone else in the league, and running a lot of man-to-man coverage. Yes, there are zone looks too. Yes, you can drop out of press into a zone. We know that. We get that. But the fact that he plays man coverage at least double the amount that the Jaguars did last year and runs press coverage like 3.5 times more than what the Jaguars did last year, it is a big freaking difference, and it's worth talking about. Okay? No one's saying that he runs exclusively man coverage. That's ridiculous. No one does that. He wouldn't say what he thinks the top needs are, said that that wouldn't help out the Jaguars talking about that. But again, he did talk about the trenches a lot. I think that tells you a lot. I think that there will be changes in the trenches. They fired their assistant offensive line coach, so I think that's one of the systemic changes maybe. And then I do think that they will bring in reinforcements this offseason, certainly. Now, I would hope they try to bring in guys that they think are starter-level players right now that can upgrade them right now versus just like competition for Luke Fortner, but we'll see how that plays out. I basically think he waffled on just about everything he said the entire presser, except for completely throwing the defensive coaching staff under the bus that he just fired, backing up every draft pick that he was asked about that he has made, and in my opinion, kind of threw the offensive line staff under the bus, threw the offensive coordinator under the bus a little bit with the identity commentary. So yeah, saying everything's collaborative, but then kind of blaming other things for their issues, in my opinion. Typical, uninspiring Trent Baalke, but that's no surprise. That's what has been here with Trent Baalke the last 3 years, going on 4. Let's hope they figure it out somehow this offseason, improving the trenches, interior defensive line, interior offensive line, edge depth, wide receiver play. We'll see what they do at corner. They have cap flexibility. They have plenty of draft capital. They can create a whole bunch of cap space to rebuild a lot of what we're talking about here. We shall see, folks. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. You can also hit me up on Twitter at Jordan DeLugo. Hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy the content, notification bell so you don't miss a show. And if you want to support the channel further, you can check out ginjag.com/shop. Pick up some new Duval gear. Y'all have a good one.